If you've walked into your local store recently, you've probably noticed something alarming: empty egg shelves and skyrocketing prices. The egg shortage in 2025 is real, and it's hitting families hard. But don't worry, today I'm going to show you how you can beat the egg shortage, keep your family healthy, and support your local community. No more panic or empty refrigerators. Let's dive in. I'll get into what's going on with the egg shortage in just a moment, but this video is for the individual who's looking to be able to confidently beat the egg shortage in 2025 and ensure that your family maintains access to fresh, nutritious eggs. You don't need to worry about sky-high grocery store prices or supply chain disruptions when you have a plan. What's your plan? Well, the key to solving this problem is understanding where your eggs come from and knowing who you can trust for ethical and sustainable eggs. And that's exactly what we're going to cover in today's video. First, let's talk about why the egg shortage is happening. A huge factor this year is the avian flu outbreak, which has wiped out millions of hens across the country. In fact, the last numbers I looked at were around 20 million hens across the country. On top of that, we've got rising feed costs, supply chain disruptions, increasing costs associated with labor and even labor shortages. These are all things that are making it hard for farmers to produce eggs. So it's really no surprise that we're seeing this ultimately trickle down and start to impact what's available on the shelves and the rising prices, what we have seen termed as eggflation. Now, there's one key point of this that I want to focus on, and it goes back to the avian flu outbreak, since that is clearly the biggest factor. When you look at the avian flu outbreak and the massive number of birds that were hit at one time, that were affected or infected, better stated in this case, at one time, one of the things that we have to draw into question is, why were these birds so susceptible? And the reason I'm telling you this again is because this is going to be part of the solution when you start to look at where you need to source your eggs from. These birds, for the most part, have been, that many of these that died were in confined facilities. They were in egg production facilities. And just for the moment, even as I say that and just think about that, that is so distant from what is an ideal pasture raised model. Not raising hens in a facility, but this is actually what does happen. They're commercial hen houses. And these birds are not allowed to express their natural birdiness, if you will, their natural chicken instincts, and they're not allowed to roam and be away from each other. And when you're enclosed in tight spaces like that, these are ideal settings for infections to proliferate. And as soon as it starts to hit a few birds, it's going to take off throughout the entire flock and continue to spread. And as these commercial facilities are having, for example, they're having deliveries made to them, they're having drivers and trucks come into these facilities to bring things out and take things away, there's going to be increased potential for that infected facility to transfer that infection to another facility's flock, which is ultimately what we have seen happen, and why there's so much attention now being put towards the habits or the actions that are antiviral or inhibiting of viral spread. These facilities are having to take consistent action to try to offset this. So my point here in the first portion of this video is really to get you to see that the environment that these birds are raised in is part of the reason that we're in the situation we're in with the availability of eggs. So we need to immediately right there start to think differently about our sourcing and how birds are raised, so that we can ultimately see a reduction in their potential for something like this to happen again. Ultimately, that all trickles down to your availability to consume high quality eggs and feed your family at a reasonable price. So how do you make sure that your family still gets the eggs that they need without having to rely on the big box stores? The answer is simple: decentralize and look locally. Local farms are typically going to have less disruptions in their supply chain, and they're not going to be impacted by national shortages. By supporting local farmers, you're not only maintaining a consistent supply of eggs for your family, but you're also helping your community thrive. And I'll give you an example on this. A couple of things actually that come to mind for me in terms of the whole notion of locally and decentralization and supply chains for local. So with our ranch, unless you had told me, unless I knew what was going on nationally and kept up with this stuff, I would have had no acknowledgement that anything was affected. Our feed supply hasn't been affected. Our availability for the supplies that we need to be able to deliver eggs and crate eggs, none of that stuff's affected. Our ability to do our job, none of that's affected. We're not worried about other people's flocks around us because they're so far away from us that it's just not an issue, and the animals are out on pasture all the time. So many of the things that set the stage or that continue to be an evolving problem when you have a centralized system just don't come into play when you're looking at doing things locally. Eggs are also interesting, and I'll share a recent example of what we looked at and why eggs specifically are such a key conversation in the local food supply. They may even be the highlight of the local food supply conversation, because when it comes to things like meats, beef, chicken, lamb, the major meats that we think about, those can be shipped fairly easily, and they can maintain stability. And you can ship them at a reasonable cost. However, eggs are not the same. Obviously, eggs are far more fragile when it comes to shipping. They just aren't going to hang or aren't going to hold up to the banging and jostling that's often associated with shipping through major couriers. And so there's a lot of protection that has to take place there. There's a lot of insulation that has to go in to make sure that those eggs stay stable. And so it makes the shipping cost pretty exorbitant when you start to think about comparing that to other animal-based products that are shipping. And that means that when you're getting those eggs, if shipping is not going to be a mainstay and is not going to be an option for most people, and especially when you look at how few farms in the United States actually ship eggs, that means that local eggs are that much more important, and having a consistent supply that you can depend on and that you can build a relationship with is that much more important in the egg conversation. Your approach to buying eggs should focus on pasture-raised eggs, meaning hens have the ability to roam and forage, and they just have freedom to be able to go out and peck through the grass and eat bugs and do the things that chickens naturally do. This isn't just healthier for the chickens, but it's also better for your family. Fresh eggs from healthy, well-cared-for chickens have more nutrients, they taste better, and they help you avoid the guilt of supporting factory farming. Of all of the buzzwords that we hear in agriculture that get translated into the food supply and that may be of interest to you, the one that we should really be focusing on here today is sustainability. The ability to continue to have access to eggs. And clearly local is the way to accomplish that. But the other consideration here too is that when you decide to make that purchasing decision, keep in mind what you're also supporting is not just better nutrition and access to eggs for your family, but you're also supporting quality over quantity, which is a key point that is often left out of the conversation. When you can have a higher quality egg that delivers better levels of nutrients, better levels of omega-3s and fats, you're winning all the way around, plus you have availability to that product on an ongoing basis. Now let's talk strategy. The egg shortage, it won't last forever. But what you can do is have a long-term plan that doesn't rely on big corporations or have concerns about supply chain disruptions. How do you do that? Well, one thing you can do is organize with your neighbors. Have a bulk buying ability. And there's a lot of wins when you do something like this. One is that your neighbors may not even be aware that things like this exist. You may be ahead of the curve, and just sharing that information with them well, you're helping your neighbor and their family as well. But the other thing is that when you develop that relationship with a local farm that can supply those eggs directly to you, you're giving your family access to a consistent supply of healthy food. So here's what you do. Here's your strategy. Find a local farm that you can work with. Second, you want to look at your neighbors, your friends, your family. Who else would be interested in buying a pasture-raised egg as you're interested in buying that pasture-raised egg, and get them in touch with that local farm as well. And the third key point on this is when that egg shortage does occur and you're looking for that local farm and they support you and are able to supply you eggs, when that national egg shortage goes away, don't disappear for that local farm. Continue to invest in the relationship so that that local farm can continue to be able to invest and always be there for you. Keep in mind, you're trying to be part of a decentralized system. How wonderful would it be to have local farms, multiple local farms, supplying pockets of the population throughout the entire country, such that when something does happen in one area, the entire country is not affected by that. That's the problem with centralization, and the answer to work around that is to put yourself in a decentralized model where you can't become a victim to someone else's mistakes. The egg shortage in 2025 may seem daunting, but it doesn't have to disrupt your family's diet or health. The solution is simple. Look to local farms, choose pasture-raised eggs, and build a strategy that focuses on food that is ethically and sustainably sourced. When it comes to eggs, if you want to understand why the conversation around eggs, especially with influencers many times, is just wrong, check out the video on the screen so you'll have a better understanding of what you're actually buying. Oh, and if you're looking for a local source of eggs, make sure you check out harvesthillsrange.com. Links in the description below.